Today we have Eric Kline. Thank you so much for coming. Eric is a partner in the corporate practice of Troutman Pepper, an international law firm. He provides legal and business advice to technology and life science companies from startup through exit. His clients include local and national venture capital investors. Mr. Kline brings more than 30 years of legal experience in his clients, and he has been named the best lawyers in America each year for the past decade. So Eric, I'll let you get started.
Okay, thank you. And thank you all for attending today. I should clarify that best lawyers is in Pittsburgh and not America, but yes, that's nice of you. So today I thought we'd spend about a half an hour talking about practical business negotiation for startup companies, which to me is something that I've been doing over the last 25, 30 years, working with smaller companies to assist in these kind of transactions as they kind of roll forward. So I thought there's some principles we can take from that. You can take from this what you want, but some things that I've gleaned from doing those kind of deals over a while. The preliminary question is, let me go down. Is it any different negotiating for the startup than it would be any other kind of deal? Some people would argue it's not, but in my view, there's a significant difference. And it really comes down to two categories of things. One is the amount of leverage that you have, which changes over time as you sort of move down the path from startup to maybe a more developed company. And the second is the objectives that you're trying to achieve. I mean, if you're a big company and you're negotiating a deal, it's kind of like any other deal. It's usually not that important one way or another. It's not going to move the meter, if you will. But for a small startup company, it could be very significant in terms of what the objectives are in the individual deal and what you're trying to achieve for the longer term. So when you negotiate for what I would call the underdog, which is the startup company, there's a couple of things you should do in advance or during the process as much as possible. The first is sort of pre-deal preparation. So, what is that? Well, you can't actually find out, maybe prior deals that they've done per se, but what you can do is spend a lot of time with that potential partner, finding out why are they interested in your company? How many of these deals do they do? Who are the principal people that are going to be involved? And learn as much as you can in advance of the deal to have some idea as you negotiate your way through the deal. The other thing you can do during the course of the negotiation is to seek the advice of advisors that you have about certain things that are maybe going on in the deal or certain terms and how those things may be interpreted over time. Or implemented, let's say, over time. And finally, because this may be, you may not have done many deals, understanding the key terms in the deal are really important. So what happens a lot with the big company is, especially where they're doing a certain kind of strategic partnering and they do it a certain way, they send you sort of basic terms and say, look, we don't really vary from these. These are in every deal that we do, kind of take it or leave it. That's usually not actually accurate or true, but it's very important for you to understand what those terms mean. So you may have to, again, use outside advisors and so on. But what you don't want to do is be in a position where you just kind of say, they said it's always the case. I'm just going to accept that. I don't want to upset them this early. You really want to understand what those are, because those terms, maybe they're in a term sheet summary of what the deal would look like. Those are likely to stay in the deal, and you're going to have a problem getting those out of the deal. So you want to know what those things mean. There's also something different about representing a startup, and that is that, you're at a significant disadvantage in the sense that the bigger company has a lot more expertise than you do in negotiating these kind of deals. So you could use a lawyer like me and so on. We do deals like that. But even in that instance, this particular potential partner for you, they're maybe negotiating the same kind of deal all the time. So they have a lot of expertise in negotiating these deals and trying to get the terms that they want. They have a timing advantage because you're kind of all ready to go. You want to get this deal done. You want to get going, whether it's, for a development that may turn into a commercialization, or maybe it's an early sales deal, whatever it is, you really want to get going. And for them, it could be 10 things on the list. So they have a huge timing advantage as to when they want it to occur. And sort of going back to the first point, they have a resource advantage too, because from their point, they can pull in experts to the process as they feel necessary, and you may not have access to as many resources. And that's why, again, the aspects of trying to do as much due diligence, et cetera, as you can in advance is to your advantage. So I sort of broke the way that I look at these deals down into three sort of buckets. It's sort of the macro picture of the deal. If you're in the business school now, you may have read whole books on negotiation. I've read several books on negotiation too. And a lot of those things are very useful. Again, when I'm representing a startup, I try to break it down into some core principles. The first is, what do I need today? What are the main things that I want to get out of this deal that will be important to me to get me to my next, let's say, value creation event, to get me to a financing, to get me to my next customer? And sort of in the bigger ticket sense, what am I prepared to give up, to get those things? The second is to think about what your counterparty needs today. And again, I'd go back to, if you're talking to a big company about a potential deal, development deal, whatever it is, maybe making an equity investment as a part of that development deal, if you spend some time with them, you'll be able to figure out what is it that they're trying to get here. Why is this important to them? And I'll go into some specific examples as we roll forward. And finally, what are the short-term and long-term impacts of the deal on my company? So, the short-term impact is what I'm giving up right away. The longer-term impact is, how does this affect my ability to get financing? How will this potentially affect my next deal with another customer? And so on. So again, I'll go into specific examples of some of those things, but that's the aggregate framework that I work from, just to kind of, in a macro level, outline, okay, here's the approach that that we should be taking. So I'm going to go through 4 examples at a very high level, superficial in a way. Oh, I should have pointed out that if you have a question, after I go through the next slide, if you want to ask those questions about halfway through the presentation, that's good, or we can do it at the end, or you can send in something on a chat, and we'll address questions. The first key license, so I'm going to use that as being a university license. It's not always university license. We've done spin-outs where it was a company that developed a certain technology. The entrepreneurs involved with that decided that they wanted to spin it out and start their own company. Those look somewhat like university licenses. They're not as long. They don't disclaim as many things as university licenses do. But on the whole, it's a similar kind of conceptual framework that you're working from. And again, the important thing when you're negotiating a license like this is to think about the financial aspects of the deal and the technology aspects of the deal. Because what you really need at the end of that first license agreement, let's say around your core technology, is the ability to operate the business and execute against your business plan. So, for example, if in many instances, universities always assume or make the assumption that you're going to have a direct sale to a customer. And those licenses aren't hard to negotiate because there's just a straight up royalty that's paid, you give them some equity, et cetera. But a lot of times, especially as a startup, you're not even going to have much of a sales force. And it's possible that you're going to sell to someone who's going to sell on to somebody else. So an OEM kind of relationship that might exist in one way or another. It's really important that in the deal, you get the wording in around license and sublicense rights that allows you to execute the plan in the way that you think the business is going to operate. That could change over time, but that's what you need to have in at sort of the highest level. The other thing to think about is that when you negotiate with, let's say, a university, it could also be a big company that maybe is licensing out certain technology. there may be certain non-negotiable provisions. For universities, a lot of times that's around indemnities and liabilities, because basically the university looks at it and says, look, we're not going to put ourselves on the line for you. We're not going to go out of business because you get sued for patent infringement or something like that. So there's a lot of things that you don't want to spend time negotiating if there's nothing to be negotiated. But really important part of the deals potentially can be negotiated, such as how much equity you might have to give up, such as the royalties that you're going to pay. And the royalties in particular become very important because longer term, again, if that rate is too high, it could scare away venture capital that wants to come into your company, because when they sort of run through your metrics, they're saying, I don't think this company could ever be profitable. They agreed to pay a 25% royalty to the university. Now, you can always go back and try to change it later, but the point is you really want to be thinking about those things. And when it comes to the equity and royalties, which again are probably the most important gives that you're doing here, it's quite possible that if you talk to the licensing officer at the university, you could get a pretty good idea of whether there is flexibility there to do this deal in a different way, where you might have to give up a little bit less than what you thought you might have to give up. And then you get to the aspect of the future reach of the license agreement itself. And so what are you looking for here? Well, you may be aware that there are other developments within the university very closely linked to your technology. And you may want to get an option on those new developments if that's possible. It's not always possible. Sometimes the university will say, look, come back to us later. We'll be willing to talk with you about that, but we're not going to put that into the deal. And another thing is that you don't want to be sort of dragged down into a hole where you're spending a lot of time on potential hypothetical things that might happen, when in fact, you want to get the license agreement signed and you want to get it out the door if possible. The other thing to think about, again, with the early license agreements are things like, what happens on the sale of my company, or what happens when I want to raise capital? Does that other party have the ability to have a veto over that? Do they have the ability to pull the license if I would want to sell this company? How is that going to work? Those are things that are really important because, again, as you roll forward, you really don't want to start leaving things behind where a third party might have the ability to influence a decision that you'd like to make with your own company. The second type of negotiation in an early stage company might be the first key hire that you make. In this area, I just sort of tell you this little anecdotal story. We represented a company 15, 20 years ago. It was a pharmacy software company. They were developing a technology that would be rolled across an individual pharmacy chain. The one that they ultimately did a deal with was CVS. But this was in the early stages of the company. And what they were trying to do is roll out their technology, which allowed individual chain stores to connect with each other. Believe it or not, at certain points, they really weren't connected. So the data just came in every day, then it was sort of uploaded, then it was sort of interpreted at corporate. This allowed them on a real-time basis to actually connect across the different stores and to have real-time look into all the data. So they wanted to hire a VP of sales to help them as they sort of move through this process. And the CEO, who was somewhat of a wheeler dealer type, decided he didn't really need any involvement from outside parties to help him negotiate this. He was just going to work out the deal with the person that he knew, and they were going to agree on terms. And that's how they would roll forward, that this was the right person. And, they wanted to get the deal done quickly. So as a part of that deal, the CEO negotiated that on a sale of the company, this particular person, the VP of sales, would get 3% of the proceeds on a sale of the company. He didn't agree to sort of like 3% of the equity today, or even some true up or something like that. He agreed to, when we sell this company, you get 3%. So he sort of documented it in his short letter with this guy, and they outlined, okay, here's what you need to do as the VP of sales, and this is what you're getting, etc. And they ended up executing the contract. He paid him a certain amount of salary too. It sort of blew up long before we got to a sale because that particular VP of sales didn't work out. So we were stuck with this provision in a contract that said you get 3% on a sale, even though within 6 months or 9 months, it was apparent this was the wrong person in the wrong position. So ultimately, we were able to kind of undo that. We got him something that he was happy with as he departed the company. But you have to be very careful in the sense that you're planning for success in these kind of deals, but you also have to be thinking about what if it doesn't work out? Because if it doesn't work out, you're going to need that equity, the equity that they actually gave to this person. You're going to need that for somebody else. So you want to be careful about those kind of things as you do early deals. One of the things that's also kind of relevant about that first key hire is that we always assume that the pain points for us are the same as the pain points for those other people. In other words, well, I mean, before that person made $400,000 a year and they got this and they got that, I'm sure they're going to want to make the same amount of money now. But in that particular instance, that person didn't care that much about the salary. They had already made a lot of money in different companies. They were really concerned about the potential upside of the equity in that company. So again, going back to that initial due diligence, in conversations with people, you can often find out, look, the concerns that I have, some of those things align directly with the concerns that they have. We can work a deal with that. And then there's some things where we are on different sides altogether. And again, the key takeaway is don't just focus, you obviously want to be successful, but you also need to focus in these kind of negotiations across the board on what happens if we're not successful. What if this thing just doesn't work out? We have to sort of plan for that in some way, although we're hoping that it will work out as we hope. I'll take a break for 1 second and see whether anybody has a question that they'd like to ask. I don't think I've gotten any on the chat, but I'll take a minute just in case, and then I'll just roll forward if there aren't any.
Yeah, there aren't any questions in chat. So if there's any live questions.
Yeah. So if you have one, let me know. If not, I'll keep going in just a second. Okay. Okay, so we've taken a quick look at that core technology and how you get that, and the first key hire and some of the considerations that you might have for that party. And now you're looking at the first important customer for your technology. And so again, going back to sort of the core principles, what do I need from this contract today? So this is an interesting area where, again, what you want may be something that the other party is very prepared to give. So in other words, what you have to give up to get it may not be as great as what you would think it would be. What you're really looking for in that first big contract in many instances is some kind of market validation or with a customer that has name recognition. And why is that important? Well, in addition to helping you hopefully get other customers along the way, it will also give you a leg up as you go out and you seek to raise capital. So the things are very interconnected in terms of why you may want something and what its future purpose is. Now, for the customer, again, our assumption might be, well, of course they need me because I have this unique technology that nobody else is offering and so on. And that could very well be true. And I'm sure that they're interested in that core technology, for a very good reason. But that first customer also may be somebody who, as a part of their corporate culture, wants to facilitate the adoption of new technologies. That may be one of their goals. So you may be in an instance where there's a commonality of interest between the kind of things that you want and the kind of things that they want to do. This is also going to this first customer. This is where, again, that preliminary due diligence will really help you out, because if you spent a lot of time with that customer in advance, or that party that's seeking to potentially be a customer or a development partner, you'll probably have a pretty good idea of why they are interested in it and how important it is to them, and whether they do 3 deals a year with startups or whether they do 20 deals a year with startups, which makes a huge difference in how they're negotiated. So there are a couple of key provisions in these kind of contracts that you have to be very concerned about. One is exclusivity. So most times when you're dealing with that first key customer and they're spending a lot of time with you and helping you flesh out the technology more, they're looking for some kind of exclusivity provisions in the contract, which give them the exclusive rights to sort of exploit your technology. Typically, that can be limited to a field of use, the business that they are in. Sometimes they want something that's broader than just the field of use. And sometimes you may have a potential first customer that's trying to be very overreaching and sort of, in essence, almost make you a subsidiary of their company. So you have to be very careful as you negotiate those things. But within a category like exclusivity, again, there's multiple things that can be negotiated. For example, how long would it potentially last? Maybe it's something that even if you gave them exclusivity, the 1 year doesn't really affect your company. Maybe it's the field of use, which is, this is a small segment of what we think the overall market is. So we'd be prepared to give that for a longer period of time. The other area that you get into with these kind of deals is a technology ownership provisions, because again, the big company oftentimes approaches this by saying, well, geez, I mean, without us, they really wouldn't have anything. We're really giving them the things that they need to sort of build out this technology. So here's a couple of pointers where that may come up. The first is that if you've got patents or provisional patents, you want to get those things on file, because you really can't dispute those once they're on file, particularly if they've happened before you've had the conversations with this particular customer. Now, sometimes they happen during the process of that, and that can get a little bit murky. But in most instances, if you file patents or you file provisional patents on what you've got, you're good on those areas. Finally, you get into this issue of the publicity of the relationship. Now, this is something that could be, really important to you, and it could be something that they're, totally on board with, as long as the relationship is a successful one. They'd be happy to have their name kind of aligned with yours, because, of course, from your standpoint, you're trying to get the word out about your company, and from their standpoint, they may be trying to get the word out that they're very cutting edge, that they work with startup companies, that they want to foster innovation and so on. So again, those are just some outlines of some of the key considerations that you might have as you look at these kind of companies. Let me go to the last slide here. So finally, and again, I think you're having whole seminars on these kind of topics. So I'm just focusing on them again from the pure negotiation standpoint of some of the key things that you'd want to consider. But in the raising capital context, you really want to be thinking, again, when you think about, well, what do I need today? How much capital do I need to move the business forward? And am I dealing with the right partner? So the interesting dynamic that exists in most of the deals that you do in venture capital today is that most parties, big investors, have sort of focused around the basic documents that they use in every deal. Some of those are actually available online through the National Venture Capital Association. And so 80% of those documents, you don't even really negotiate in any detail. They're just sort of a given. And typically, when you go from the first financing you do to the next financing you do, nothing ever comes up with the documents themselves. But the point is, the key focus that you should have is sort of, how much money do I really want to raise that gets me to the next value creation? And, is this the right party? And so in terms of what you give up, you're thinking about things like, well, of course, what's the economic upside? And you can run spreadsheets around that to try to have some idea of, well, what would this mean with these terms? You know, if we sold the company for $20 million, $30 million, et cetera. But maybe the more important aspect is to think about how much operational control are you going to give up, you know, to get that particular money and partner that you're interested in. And again, this goes back to the due diligence aspect of spending some time to really find out about that other party, to determine what are they like to work with? What are other portfolio companies that they've worked with? And how would those people describe them? You know, sort of to get a real picture of what it's like. And so as you sort of roll forward, you're also thinking about what are the longer term consequences of the deal. And there were two things that sort of stuck out in my mind. One is this is your future, likely your future investment partner too. So if they come into the deal, this is the person you're going to be dealing with in the next round as well. So that's another reason why you want to make sure that, you know, it is the party that you want to be dealing with. And this party is also going to sit on the board of directors and likely continue to sit on the board of directors. So you're going to have to work with them very closely as you roll forward. Again, there are many aspects of venture capital deals. If you look through a term sheet, you can see there's, you know, they go on for 5 pages of almost small print. But at the very highest level, you want to be thinking about these key aspects of the deal itself before you dig into more of the details. So with that, that's kind of the formal part of the presentation.